The Lemnorian Emperor deactivated the holographic record of the ultimatum sent to humanity. A reptilian alien grin spreading across his scaly face. He chuckled. The humans will soon quake in fear as our armada descends upon their puny planet. They won't dare resist. Captain Robert Allen punched the metal wall of the shadowy SDF briefing room as the alien transmission ended abruptly. God damn it, those smug Lemnorian bastards. We can't just roll over and let them annex Earth. Admiral Xander sighed, a nasty scar visible on his leathery cheek even in the dimly lit room. Our forces are no match for the Lemnorian Empire, Allen. All we can do is send you on a covert scouting mission to their homeworld. Find out what we're up against, so we at least know how screwed we are before they steamroll us. Robert clenched his fists as he marched to the sleek Shadowhawk stealth ship in the launch bay. If his mission failed, Earth would fall to alien conquest without humanity even knowing what hit them. But the grizzled Space Defense Force veteran swore under his breath that no matter what he found out there, he would fight to his last breath before he let those scaly alien freaks take his home. As the Shadowhawk tore through the void towards the Lemnorian system, Robert scanned his sensors, brow furrowed. Something wasn't right. The fourth planet was lit up like a Christmas tree, energy signatures spiking off the charts. A massive fleet of warships hung in orbit like vultures circling a kill. This has to be some kind of military stronghold, Robert muttered under his breath. He had to get a closer look. Engaging the Shadowhawk's cloaking systems, Robert guided the ship into the planet's atmosphere, the hull shuddering as it pierced the turbulent outer layers. What he saw took his breath away. The planet's surface was a metal jungle of industrial complexes stretching to the horizon. Assembly lines churned out fighter craft, dropships, tanks, an endless stream of machines built for conquest. Supply ships launched from colossal hangars, ferrying crates of weapons to the orbiting fleet. It was an arsenal on a scale Robert had never imagined. The Lemnorians weren't just preparing for an invasion. They were ready to unleash hell. A piercing alarm tore through the cockpit. "Shit, they've made us," Robert growled. Lemnorian fighters screamed towards the Shadowhawk, disruptor cannons blazing. Robert wrenched the control stick, sending the ship into a dizzying spiral. Craggy canyons and sheer cliffs flashed past the viewport as he pushed the Shadowhawk to its limits, the bone-shaking impacts of enemy fire rattling his teeth. Warnings flashed across the control panel as the shield strained under the onslaught. Robert danced the ship between towering rock formations, the Lemnorian fighters struggling to match his maneuvers. With a final desperate thrust of the engines, the Shadowhawk burst from the planet's gravity well and shot into the stars. Robert slumped back in his chair, his heart pounding. The Lemnorians were an existential threat to Earth. He had to warn the SDF, but would they even stand a chance against the coming firestorm? As the Shadowhawk tore through the void towards home, a tiny light blinked to life on its hull, a homing beacon placed there by a Lemnorian saboteur. In his shadowy command center, Quasar watched the human ship's progress and smiled a predator's smile. The hunt was on. Robert burst into Admiral Xander's office, not bothering to knock. The Admiral looked up from his desk, his brow creased with concern. "What did you find out there, Allen?" Robert took a deep breath before launching into his report, detailing the vast Lemnorian war machine he had witnessed. He described the endless assembly lines churning out weapons of war, the massive fleet orbiting the planet like a swarm of locusts. As he spoke, he watched the color drain from Xander's face. "This is worse than we could have imagined," Xander muttered, his voice heavy with dread. "We need more intel, and fast. I'm sending you back out there, Allen. Take the Shadowhawk and a team of our best operatives, infiltrate their command center, and find out exactly what they're planning." Robert nodded grimly. He had a bad feeling about this mission, but he knew it was their only chance to stay ahead of the Lemnorians. As he gathered his team and prepared the Shadowhawk for departure, he couldn't shake the sense that something was off. It had all been too easy, his escape from the Lemnorian fighters, his return to Earth. It was almost as if they had wanted him to get away. His suspicions were confirmed when Dr. Ava Novak, the Shadowhawk's lead scientist, called him over to the ship's hull. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with tension. She pointed to a small, blinking device attached to the ship's exterior. "It's a tracking beacon. The Lemnorians have been monitoring our every move." Robert's blood ran cold. They had played right into the enemy's hands, but he refused to let them win. "We'll use it against them," he said, his mind racing. "We'll send the Shadowhawk on a series of random jumps through hyperspace, create a false trail for them to follow. Meanwhile, we'll take a separate ship to their command center. It's risky, but it's our only chance." As they approached the Lemnorian command center, an eerie silence hung in the air. The ships that had once swarmed the planet were gone, the facility seemingly abandoned. Robert and his team exchanged uneasy glances as they entered the command center, weapons drawn. But there was no one there. The Lemnorians had vanished, leaving only empty corridors and darkened screens. Robert's heart sank as the realization hit him. The Lemnorians had been toying with them all along. They were always one step ahead, always in control, and now they were gone, leaving only questions in their wake. Where were they now? What was their next move? Robert clenched his fists, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. Whatever the answers were, he knew one thing for certain: the fight for Earth's survival had only just begun. Robert's heart raced as he and his team scoured the abandoned Lemnorian command center, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. A sense of unease hung heavy in the air, like a physical weight pressing down on their shoulders. "Over here," called out Sergeant Hawkins, his voice tight with tension. "I think I found something." The team converged on Hawkins' position, their weapons at the ready. He stood before a nondescript wall, his hand resting on a barely visible control panel. Dr. Novak stepped forward, her brow furrowed in concentration as she examined the panel. "This is advanced technology even for the Lemnorians. Give me a moment." Her fingers flew over the controls, and with a hiss of hydraulics the wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber bathed in an eerie green light. In the center of the room, a holographic map of the galaxy shimmered into existence. Robert stepped closer, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. Earth hung at the center of the map, surrounded by countless Lemnorian ships, their positions marked with pulsing red lights. A sudden clang reverberated through the chamber, and the doors slammed shut behind them. A countdown appeared on the map, the numbers ticking down with a chilling finality. "It's a trap," Hawkins shouted, his voice edged with panic. "We need to get out of here now." The team spread out, searching for any means of escape, but the chamber was sealed tight. The Lemnorian technology was unlike anything they had encountered before, and precious seconds slipped away as they struggled to find a way out. Just as the timer reached its final seconds, the door hissed open, and the team poured out into the corridor. They sprinted for the exit, their hearts pounding in their chests as the command center shook beneath their feet. They burst out into the open air just as the complex exploded behind them, the shockwave sending them stumbling to their knees. Robert looked back at the smoking ruins, his mind reeling with the implications of what they had discovered. His comm crackled to life, Admiral Xander's voice filling his ear. "Captain Allen, we have a situation. The Lemnorian fleet has been spotted on the edge of the solar system. They're closing in fast." Robert's blood ran cold. "How long do we have?" "Hours at most. Earth's defenses are mobilizing, but we're outnumbered and outgunned. We need a miracle." Robert's mind raced, trying to process the information from the holographic map. And then it hit him, the supply base. A hidden Lemnorian outpost, located on a remote moon. If they could destroy it, they might be able to cripple the Lemnorian fleet, buy Earth the time it so desperately needed. He turned to his team, his jaw set with determination. "Gear up, we're not done yet." As their ship approached the desolate moon, an eerie silence enveloped them. The supply base loomed ahead, its surface still and unguarded. But Robert knew better than to trust appearances. The Lemnorians were too smart, too calculated to leave such a vital outpost undefended. He could feel it in his gut. They were walking into a trap. But with Earth's fate hanging in the balance and time running out, he had no choice but to press forward into the unknown dangers that awaited them. "These energy fields, they're like nothing I've ever seen," she murmured, her voice tight with concern. "They're interfering with our weapons and equipment." Robert's grip tightened on his rifle. They couldn't afford to go in blind. "We need to find a way to disable those fields before we proceed." He turned to his team, his voice low and urgent. "Split up. Half of you with me will scout the base for vulnerabilities. The rest, find the source of these fields and shut them down." As Robert's group ventured deeper into the base, a chill crept up his spine. The corridors were too quiet, too still. Their footsteps echoed off the metal walls, each sound amplified in the eerie silence. Suddenly Hawkins held up a hand, his eyes narrowing. "Sir, I think I found something." He pointed to a narrow passageway, barely visible in the dim light. Robert nodded, motioning for the team to follow. They crept down the tunnel, their senses on high alert. The air grew colder with each step, a dank, musty smell filling their nostrils. A distant scream pierced the silence, followed by a heavy, unnatural silence. Robert's blood ran cold. He signaled his team to investigate, his heart pounding in his chest. As they rounded the corner, the sight before them stopped them dead in their tracks. Twisted, deformed creatures stumbled through the tunnels, their bodies a grotesque patchwork of Lemnorian and something else entirely. Their eyes gleamed with a feral, hungry light. "My God," Hawkins breathed, his face pale. "What have they done?" Robert's mind raced, piecing together the horror before him. The Lemnorians had been experimenting with biological warfare, twisting their own soldiers into something monstrous. And if they unleashed this on Earth... A shout crackled over the comms, snapping Robert back to the present. It was Dr. Novak, her voice strained. "Captain, we found the power core, but we've been compromised. We need backup, now." Robert cursed under his breath. They were out of time. "Hold tight, Doctor, we're on our way." They raced through the base, the sounds of gunfire and shouting growing louder with each step. As they burst into the central chamber, Robert's heart sank. Dr. Novak and her team were surrounded, Lemnorian guards closing in from all sides. Robert's team opened fire, catching the guards off guard. The room erupted into chaos, energy blasts crisscrossing the air. Robert ducked and weaved, his rifle barking in his hands. One by one, the Lemnorians fell, until only Robert's team remained standing. "The power core!" Dr. Novak shouted, her face streaked with sweat and grime. "We have to destroy it!" Robert nodded, already pulling charges from his pack. They worked quickly, planting the explosives at key structural points. As they made their escape, the charges detonated, the ground shaking beneath their feet. A chain reaction tore through the base, consuming everything in a blinding flash of light. But as they reached their ship, a chilling message awaited them. Quasar's face filled the screen, his eyes glinting with malice. "You may have won this battle," he hissed, "but the war is far from over. We will never attack Earth directly, for we have a far more insidious plan in mind. Prepare yourselves, for the true horror is about to begin." The Shadowhawk tore through the Earth's atmosphere, the hull glowing red-hot as it plunged through the turbulent air. Inside the cockpit, Robert gripped the controls with white knuckles, his brow furrowed with concern. Quasar's ominous message echoed in his mind, a chilling promise of the horrors to come. As the ship touched down at the SDF headquarters, Robert was greeted by a scene of utter chaos. Soldiers and civilians alike rushed about in a frenzy, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Alarms blared, and the air crackled with tension. Robert pushed his way through the throng, his team close behind him. They burst into the command center, where Admiral Xander stood hunched over a holographic display, his face grim. Xander looked up, his eyes haunted. "It's a nightmare, Alan. Reports are flooding in from all over the globe, people disappearing, others driven mad by visions and nightmares. It's like something out of a horror film." Dr. Novak stepped forward, her scanner already in hand. "Sir, I'm detecting traces of Lemnorian energy signatures. It's faint, but it's everywhere." Robert's blood ran cold. The technology we brought back, the wreckage from their ships, could it be causing this? Novak nodded, her face pale. It's a form of psychological warfare, targeting the human mind directly. The Lemnorians are eroding our defenses from within. As if on cue, the command center erupted into a cacophony of shouts and alarms. On the holographic display, the map of Earth was lit up like a Christmas tree, each light representing another outbreak of madness and chaos. Robert watched in horror as society began to unravel before his eyes. Panic spread like wildfire, and the streets descended into anarchy. The Lemnorians had found a way to conquer Earth without ever setting foot on its soil. Suddenly, a message flashed across Robert's personal display. It was a set of coordinates, along with a cryptic warning. The key to ending this madness lies beneath the ice. But beware, for the truth may be more terrifying than you ever imagined. Robert's mind raced. Could this be a trap, another Lemnorian ploy? Or was it a genuine lead, a chance to strike back against their insidious plot? As Robert and his team boarded the Shadowhawk once more, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into the heart of darkness itself. But with the fate of Earth hanging in the balance, he had no choice but to press on. The Arctic wind howled across the desolate landscape, whipping snow and ice into a blinding frenzy. Robert and his team pushed forward, their thermal gear barely adequate against the biting cold. As they approached the coordinates, a strange shape began to emerge from the whiteout conditions. It was a structure buried deep beneath the ice, its outlines alien and foreboding. They had found the Lemnorian research facility. Inside, the air was stale and frigid, the corridors cast in an eerie green glow. Robert led the way, his weapon at the ready, every sense on high alert. They pushed deeper into the facility, past abandoned laboratories and strange, twisted equipment, and then they found the records, the evidence of the Lemnorians' sinister experiments. Project Nightmare, a decades-long effort to unlock the hidden potential of the human mind, to turn humanity's greatest strength into its greatest weakness. The Lemnorians had been abducting humans for years, subjecting them to unthinkable horrors in the name of their twisted science. Robert's stomach turned as he flipped through the files, each page revealing a new atrocity. Mind control, psychological conditioning, sleeper agents programmed to infiltrate and destroy. The Lemnorians had planned to conquer Earth from within, to turn its own people against it. Suddenly a scream echoed through the facility, followed by the sound of gunfire. Robert's team rushed towards the commotion, only to be met by a sight out of their worst nightmares. The twisted results of the Lemnorians' experiments, former human subjects transformed into mindless drones, poured out of the shadows, their eyes blank and soulless. They attacked with a ferocity that was wholly inhuman, heedless of their own safety. Robert and his team fought back, their weapons tearing through the ranks of the abominations. But for everyone they cut down, two more seemed to take its place, an endless tide of horror and madness. As they pushed deeper into the facility, Robert realized the terrible truth. The Lemnorians had already set their plan in motion. The sleeper agents were active, the seeds of chaos already planted. If they couldn't find a way to stop Project Nightmare, Earth would fall, conquered from within by an enemy it never even knew it had. The clock was ticking, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. In the frozen heart of the Lemnorian facility, Robert and his team prepared to make their final stand, knowing that failure was not an option. The future of Earth, and all who called it home, depended on them. Robert's mind raced as he led his team deeper into the Lemnorian facility, their footsteps echoing through the eerily silent corridors. The weight of their mission pressed down on him, the fate of Earth and countless other worlds hanging in the balance. They pushed forward, clearing room after room until they stumbled upon a central control center, its walls lined with advanced technology and glowing databanks. Dr. Novak rushed to the consoles, her fingers flying across the alien interface. "I'm in," she breathed, her eyes widening as streams of data flashed across the screens. "My God, Robert, Project Nightmare is even worse than we thought." Robert leaned in, his heart pounding as he scanned the information. The Lemnorians had been conducting mind control experiments not just on Earth, but on a galactic scale. Sleeper agents, programmed to infiltrate and destroy, seeded across countless worlds. The ultimatum was a diversion, Robert realized, his blood running cold. They wanted us looking outward while the real threat grew from within. Suddenly an alarm pierced the air. The control room bathed in pulsing red light. Robert cursed under his breath. "They know we're here. Barricade the doors." His team sprang into action, overturning tables and welding shut entrances, as the sound of marching footsteps grew louder. They were trapped, and it was only a matter of time before the Lemnorians broke through. Dr. Novak worked frantically at the consoles, searching for any weakness in Project Nightmare, any way to unravel the Lemnorian plot. And then a gasp escaped her lips. "Robert, I found something. The Lemnorians aren't just using technology, they're exploiting a genetic mutation. Some people are naturally resistant to their mind control." Robert's eyes widened, the pieces falling into place. "We need to find these people, protect them. They may be our only hope." But time was running out. The Lemnorian forces were nearly upon them, and Project Nightmare was still active. Robert made a split-second decision, one that could change the course of the war. "Upload a virus," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Wipe out everything related to Project Nightmare, and send a signal to Earth, warning them about the sleeper agents." Dr. Novak nodded, her fingers a blur as she coded the virus and prepared the upload. Just as the progress bar neared completion, the doors exploded inward, Lemnorian soldiers pouring into the room. Robert and his team opened fire, the air thick with the scent of ozone and singed flesh as they battled the mind-controlled drones. From the corner of his eye, Robert saw Dr. Novak crumple to the ground, a searing energy bolt tearing through her shoulder. But even as she fell, her hand slammed down on the upload key, the virus spreading through the Lemnorian network like a wildfire. With a final, defiant gasp, she looked up at Robert, a weak smile on her blood-stained lips. "It's done." Robert scooped her into his arms, his team laying down covering fire as they fought their way out of the control room and through the winding corridors of the facility. They burst out into the frigid Arctic air, the Shadowhawk waiting for them like a beacon of hope in the endless white. As they rocketed away from the base, the virus spreading and the facility collapsing behind them, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was far from certain. Had they truly stopped Project Nightmare, or had they just unleashed a new kind of chaos upon the galaxy? The war was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The Shadowhawk's engines roared as Robert guided the ship back to Earth, his knuckles white on the controls. In the medbay, Dr. Novak lay motionless, her vital signs weak but stable. The rest of the team sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their mission bearing down on them. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, Robert's comm crackled to life. "Captain Allen, this is SDF Command. We've received your signal and are standing by." Robert acknowledged the transmission, his voice hoarse, requesting immediate medical support upon landing. "Dr. Novak is in critical condition." The Shadowhawk touched down on the landing pad, a team of medics already rushing to meet them. They carefully loaded Dr. Novak onto a stretcher, whisking her away to the base's medical facility. Robert and his team were ushered into a briefing room, where Admiral Xander and a group of high-ranking officers awaited them. The room was tense, the air thick with apprehension. "Captain Allen," Xander began, his face drawn, "your signal has been received, and our forces are working to identify and neutralize the sleeper agents. But the process is slow. The Lemnorians' mind control techniques are proving difficult to detect." Robert leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "That's not all, Admiral. We've learned that some of the sleeper agents have infiltrated Earth's government and military. They're sowing discord and confusion from within." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Trust was breaking down, paranoia spreading through the ranks. Robert stood, his eyes hard. The only way to stop this is to find the source of the Lemnorians' power. We need to hunt down Quasar. Xander nodded, his jaw tight. Agreed, but with Dr. Novak out of commission, you'll need a new team. The door slid open, revealing two figures. The first was a lean, intense man with piercing eyes, Dr. Marcus Reeves, a renowned xenopsychologist. The second was a hulking Lemnorian, his scales scarred and his eyes haunted, Zaxor, a defector who had turned against his own kind. Gentlemen, Xander said, meet your new team. As the Shadowhawk tore through the void, Robert pored over the data they had collected, searching for any clue to Quasar's location. Dr. Reeves and Zaxor worked tirelessly, combining their knowledge of Lemnorian psychology and technology to narrow down the possibilities. As they approached Nyx, a sudden wave of psychic energy slammed into the ship, nearly overwhelming their minds. Robert gritted his teeth, fighting to maintain control. Nyx is the source, he gasped. Quasar must be connected to it somehow. With each step, the psychic attacks grew stronger, tearing at their thoughts, their memories. Dr. Reeves stumbled, his face pale, but Zaxor caught him, his eyes glinting with determination. At last they reached the heart of Nyx, a pulsing, sickening core of energy, and there, waiting for them, was Quasar. But he was not the mastermind they had expected. His body was twisted, his eyes blazing with an unholy light. He was a conduit, a puppet, enslaved by the power of Nyx itself. Robert raised his weapon, his team at his side. They had come too far to turn back now. The fate of Earth, of the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. And as they charged forward into the maw of madness, one thing was certain. The nightmare was far from over. In the pulsating heart of Nyx, Robert and his team fought with every ounce of their strength and will, their weapons blazing, and their minds straining against the relentless psychic onslaught. The very air crackled with malevolent energy, the ground beneath their feet shuddering with each wave of psychic force. Zaxor, his scales glistening with sweat, hunched over a makeshift device, his clawed hands working feverishly. With a final guttural growl, he slammed his fist against the machine, and a shimmering field of energy sprang to life around the team. "The shield will hold, but not for long," Zaxor warned, his voice strained. "We must act quickly." As the battle raged on, Dr. Reeves closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. He reached out with his mind, probing the seething maelstrom of psychic energy that engulfed them. "The planet's psychic energy. It's not attacking us out of malice," he shouted over the din of battle. "It's a defense mechanism, triggered by our fear and aggression." Robert gritted his teeth, his rifle bucking in his hands as he fired at the shadowy figures that swarmed around them. "Then how do we stop it?" "We need to communicate with Nyx to show it that we mean no harm," Dr. Reeves replied, his voice urgent. Robert hesitated, his instinct screaming at him to keep fighting. But deep down he knew Dr. Reeves was right. With a deep breath, he lowered his weapon and stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Quasar," he called out, his voice raw with emotion. "I know you're still in there somewhere, the man you once were, the man who fought for what was right." Quasar, his eyes blazing with psychic energy, turned to face Robert. For a moment it seemed as though he would strike, his hand raised to deliver a killing blow. Dr. Reeves, seizing the opportunity, closed his eyes and reached out with his mind once more. This time he focused not on the planet, but on Quasar himself. With every ounce of his skill and training, he forged a mental link between them, a bridge across the chasm of madness and despair. Through that link, Dr. Reeves showed Quasar the truth. He showed him images of the galaxy's wonders, of the countless species that lived and thrived among the stars. He showed him the potential for peace, for cooperation, for a future free from the cycle of fear and aggression. And slowly, miraculously, the psychic attacks began to subside. The planet's energy, once a raging tempest, began to calm, to settle into a gentle, pulsing rhythm. Quasar, his body shuddering, collapsed to the ground. Robert and his team rushed to his side, their faces etched with concern and exhaustion. "Is it over?" Zaxor asked, his voice hoarse. "No," Robert replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is just the beginning. The Lemnorians are still out there, still enslaved by the psychic control that once held Nyx in its grip." He turned to face his team, his eyes blazing with determination. "We have to find a way to free them, to show them that there's another path. It won't be easy, but we can't give up now." As they prepared to leave Nyx, Robert cast one last glance at the planet's surface, now pulsing with a gentle, soothing light. A beacon of hope, a symbol of the change that was to come. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with peril, but for the first time Robert allowed himself to believe that victory was possible. The nightmare wasn't over, but perhaps, just perhaps, they had found the key to ending it once and for all. Robert and his team stumbled out of the Shadowhawk onto the SDF landing pad, their bodies battered, but their spirits unbroken. The knowledge they had gained on Nyx weighed heavily on their minds as they were rushed to a debriefing room deep within the complex. For hours, Robert and Dr. Reeves pored over the data, working tirelessly to develop a way to break the psychic hold that Nyx had over the Lemnorians. Zaxor, drawing upon his intimate knowledge of Lemnorian physiology, provided invaluable insights. But as they presented their findings to the SDF leadership, they were met with a wall of resistance. Fear and mistrust had taken root, the scars of the conflict still raw and bleeding. "You can't seriously expect us to trust the Lemnorians after everything they've done." Admiral Vance slammed his fist on the table, his face twisted with rage. "We need to strike now, while we have the chance." Robert stood his ground, his voice steady. "Attacking the Lemnorians will only lead to more bloodshed. We have to break the cycle, find a way to reach them." The debate raged on, tensions rising with each passing moment. Dr. Reeves tried to appeal to their reason, explaining the intricacies of the psychic link, but his words fell on deaf ears. Just as it seemed they had reached an impasse, an alarm pierced the air. The room fell silent, a chill settling over everyone as they turned to the view screen. The image that greeted them was one of pure devastation. Earth's cities lay in ruins, fires raging unchecked as Lemnorian ships rained down destruction from above. The surprise attack had caught them completely off guard. Robert felt his world shatter as the casualty reports began to flood in. But it was the news of Admiral Xander's death that truly broke him. His mentor, his friend, gone in an instant. Grief and rage warred within him, threatening to consume him entirely. But through the haze of pain, a single thought crystallized in his mind. He had to end this, not just for Earth, but for everyone who had been lost. With a heavy heart, Robert gathered his team once more. They would take the fight to the Lemnorian homeworld itself, armed with the knowledge they had gained on Nyx. It was a desperate plan, but it was their only hope. As the Shadowhawk tore through the void, Robert stared out at the stars, his jaw set with grim determination. He knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, that the scars of the conflict ran deep. But he also knew that he had to try, to find a way to break the cycle of fear and aggression that had brought them to this point. The Lemnorian homeworld loomed before them, a twisted alien landscape that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Robert and his team made their way to the heart of the capital city, fighting through waves of mind-controlled Lemnorian soldiers. Finally, they stood before the Lemnorian leader, a towering figure wreathed in shadows. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, his eyes closed in concentration as he reached out with his mind. The link was tenuous at first, the Lemnorian psyche a maelstrom of rage and confusion. But gradually Dr. Reeves began to break through, showing them the truth of Nyx's manipulation. The Lemnorian leader reeled back, their eyes widening in horror as the realization of what they had done washed over them. The psychic hold shattered, and with it, the Lemnorian forces fell still. In the eerie silence that followed, Robert approached the leader, his hand outstretched in a gesture of peace. "It's over," he said softly. "We can end this, here and now." The Lemnorian looked at him, their eyes haunted by the weight of their actions. For a moment it seemed as though they might refuse, but then, slowly, they reached out and grasped Robert's hand. The ceasefire was tenuous, the wounds on both sides still raw and bleeding. Many on Earth refused to accept it, their hatred for the Lemnorians too deeply ingrained. And among the Lemnorians, there were those who still clung to the old ways, unable to let go of the cycle of violence. But as Robert stood on the bridge of the Shadowhawk, staring out at the stars, he knew that they had taken the first step. The road ahead would be long and difficult, the scars of the war not easily healed. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.